afternoon. I'm a little nervous. So first, I want to say that I'm so humbled to be here today with you and for this cause. I have said frequently that while I am so disappointed in the circumstances that have brought us together, I have been truly blessed to meet such amazing people while advocating for public education. The teachers and the parents who are putting themselves out there on behalf of our kids inspire me every day. And so I have to begin with gratitude and tell you thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you do, whether it is in front of a classroom or as a parent volunteer on field trips, as a witness testifying in House or Senate Education Committee hearings, or here today rallying in Topeka. What you are doing matters. What you are doing is making the difference in the lives of Kansas children, and what you're doing is appreciated so very, very much. I was asked to speak a little about why I am involved in protecting Kansas public education, specifically about why last year I did walk 60 miles from my home to Topeka to raise awareness about how the funding cuts were affecting our classrooms and about the attempts to implement a privatization agenda in our state, and then to explain why I went again this year and how 4 other parents and another teacher came to join me. I have the sneaking suspicion that my reasons are very similar to your own reasons for being here today. I have the suspicion that nothing I say here is going to provide anything revelatory for you, but I want to share my story so that you will know that you are not alone. I attended public schools in Kansas from kindergarten until I walked across the stage at the University of Kansas for the second time, and I have firsthand experience inside a Kansas classroom, but only as a student. And I know how very fortunate I am to have attended the schools I did and to have received the benefit of the instructors who headed my classrooms. And when my husband and I remained in Kansas to start our family, we did so not only because our family ties are strong, but because we were already in a place that valued public education. Kansas historically has supported education and historically has supported equality, and my husband and I were confident in raising a family in a state with a proud tradition of providing that solid education foundation for every child. Our oldest started kindergarten in 2010, and we were so excited, so thrilled. We were aware that education funding was tight because the country was still reeling from the recession, but our daughter was enrolled in the same elementary school that my husband and his brothers had attended, and at kindergarten roundup, my husband called me so excited to report that there were teachers there that had taught him, that there were teachers that remembered him as a child, and that they promised to not hold it against our children when they got there. Our daughter's kindergarten class was large, but it wasn't unwieldy. I think there was maybe 19 or 20 students in her class. Her teacher, amazing, and she was doing beautifully. And perhaps some of you are familiar with the funding cuts that came through that year. Perhaps you experienced something like what then happened in our district. Our district wanted parents to have a measure of control over what was going to be affected by the anticipated loss of funds. And so we were asked to go online and complete a survey. And as Kansans, we are sensible. We recognize that a recession is bound to come with belt tightening, and we dutifully went online to take our survey, and we were presented with many options on what could be reduced, they said. They said they could reduce music, like the after-school strings program. They could reduce janitorial services. They could reduce nurses. They could reduce nurses' aides. They could reduce administrators. Or we could vote for larger class sizes, which we all know what that means, reducing teachers. They could increase the all-day kindergarten fees. They could increase sporting fees. They could diminish art programs. And when my husband and I got to the end of the survey, the computer program provided us with the sum of what we've been able to save the district, and I will tell you, it was not much. And the sum of what my husband and I were willing to sacrifice versus what the ballpark of the millions that were being lost was stark. And the computer program showed us that. And we knew that our district was in a really impossible situation. So what followed was school closings and eliminated staff, and classrooms that were only cleaned by a janitor every few days, and increased class sizes. So that by our time our daughter was in 2nd grade, her grade had been consolidated from 3 teachers to 2, and there were 29 other children in her classroom. 30 total 7 and 8-year-old children vying for one teacher's attention. 30 total 7 and 8-year-olds with short attention spans, and I have to go to the bathrooms, and maybe I didn't get breakfast today, and maybe I just have a case of the wiggles. And I couldn't believe it. I could not stop talking about it everywhere I went. I was like, what is going on? Our class sizes are nuts. And my daughter's soccer coach, because it's always a soccer coach, isn't it, said, you need to come to this meeting. And other parents have started a group called GameOn for Kansas Schools. And so I went. And this is where it was really revelatory for me. I learned about the boilerplate legislation from the American Legislative Exchange Council. I learned how policy was pushed by lobbyists at the Kansas Policy Institute, an anti-tax lobbying group. I learned how private corporations plan to profit off of our kids with a privatization agenda that included nouveau vouchers in charter schools. And I was furious. Furious because I know how good and how amazing our schools can be when they have the funds they need to perform. Furious because I had Mrs. McCormick in 6th grade at Brookridge Elementary School who taught us to put the oomph in every try and who made sure every 6th grader had a speaking part in our ridiculous play about Edison. Furious because I had Mr. Holt in middle school who took I don't know how many middle schoolers to Washington, D.C. to prepare us to be active and productive citizens. And if you know Mr. Holt, buy him a drink. And I was furious because I had Mr. Dawson, a high school biology teacher at Shawnee Mission South, and he kind of resembled a somewhat befuddled Santa Claus in a tie-dye shirt, and he made science so awesome that I did not skip his class once, even though it was after lunch, and even though when I was in high school, all lunches were open, so I totally could have skipped his class. But I didn't. And I was furious because my daughter had just finished 1st grade with Mrs. Ludwig, a teacher that my husband's family knew back from when his brothers were in her kindergarten classroom, where she had taught for 20 years before her knees made it too difficult to get down on the mat for story time. So she moved up to 1st grade. And we were so thankful that our daughter had the opportunity to experience her kindness and the skills that came with being an educator for that many years. As parents, GameOn members watched the 2013 legislative session unfold with sinking hearts, and we were just a small group, and we were trying our best to get the word out. And we saw detrimental legislation barreling towards our schools, and we knew we needed to do something big. And I'm not sure exactly where the idea to walk came from or why it clicked that it might be a good idea, but we Googled the distance and we saw it was roughly 60 miles and that it could be broken up into a few days, and we could arrive on Tuesday where we had been asked to testify as parents since the legislature apparently wasn't listening to the teachers. And so on a Friday, the Friday before I left, when we decided we were going to do this, I called Barb Casey, who is here today and who is an amazing teacher that I had met through GameOn. And I told her I could do this, but I needed company. And she put the word out, and literally within minutes of Barb putting something out into the universe, I was getting texts from teachers I had no idea who they were, and with this outpouring of love and support, and I cannot express to you what it meant. And what I learned then, and what I have learned again and again since then, is that teachers show up. If you need something, if you need someone, teachers have got your back. And by the time I left my house that Saturday morning, there was a network of people, both parents through GameOn and educators through Barb, rolling into action to walk with me, to bring food, and to keep me company. And on that first walk, our GameOn Facebook page grew. We started that Saturday morning with about 300 people, and I will tell you today, when I checked it this morning, we're hovering around 3,500. And it wasn't just followers that we were gaining, we were learning from parents across the state as they reached out to explain to us how the budget cuts were hurting their districts. We knew what was happening in our own, But the rural communities were telling us how terrified they were about the consolidation of their schools, about the loss of their schools, and what that would do to their communities. And throughout the past year, as GameOn has grown, I have to pause for a moment to tell you something slightly off topic, and that is during this time, my middle child became very ill, and that my family was visiting with medical specialists, both locally and out of state, and that the past year has been one of the most terrifying times of my life. And I want you to know that it was our children's school community that held my family up. And I want you to know that my son's kindergarten teacher, with help from parent volunteers, threw my son a special day before one of his hospitalizations. And they had the kids make the sweetest good luck and get well cards. And that when the PTA organized meals for my family, that it was the teachers who signed up first to shower my family with love and with food. And that when I was out of town with my son visiting doctors, my daughter's kindergarten teacher remembered her favorite meal and brought it to my house for my husband and my daughter and my other son. Because Kansas teachers show up when you need them. Because public education is about making sure that every child has an equal and excellent opportunity to an education, but it is also about what makes us communities and how it represents the very best of who and what we can be for one another. And we knew going into this year's legislative session it was going to be tough, and we knew they would want to push the policy changes that would implement privatization, and we knew that the Supreme Court's funding decision was coming, and we didn't know how it was going to play out, but we anticipated another walk was going to be necessary. And in light of my son's health, I wasn't sure that I would be able to go. And so at a GameOn meeting, I asked who else can come. And without hesitation, other parents committed. I have to tip my hat to them. They are not, unfortunately, here today. Well, at least some of them aren't. But Jeff Sykes, Steven Wilson, Amber Versola, Whitney Johnson, and finally my favorite art teacher, Josh Greaves. And as it turned out, I was able to go. We left on Friday, March 28th. We arrived on Monday, March 31st. And when we got here, we were greeted with the news that the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, the committee that was addressing the funding inequities by the court, the chair of that committee had resigned over disputes over the privatization policy. And we were jokingly told that perhaps if we walked more frequently, we could garner more resignations. We are considering it. So, and then that week after the 31st, up until the 5th, GameOn parents, just as I'm sure that you were following the course of the bill in the committee, and we were watching what they were doing with the policy provisions. And by Saturday, April 5th, as you know, things were looking pretty nuts. If you are involved with social media at all, the drama unfolding on Twitter was intense. Hundreds of you were here at the Capitol witnessing the voting, or the delay of voting, with the hope of reminding our legislature to do the right thing, to protect public education from policy provisions that had either been debated and failed in education committee hearings or had not even been heard there at all, but had then been attached to the funding provisions at the 11th hour. And Kansas wanted and deserved a clean funding bill. And here is where I have to recognize that teachers, you have been in this game for much longer than I have, and you're better at it. But I want you to know that GameOn parents found red shirts, and we jerseyed up, and we came to Topeka to witness what happened on Saturday. And we were with you on Sunday when it passed with that bare minimum of the 63 votes required to cram it through. I want you to know that I have never been more proud to be a Kansan than I was when we were there standing with you while you had your hands raised silently in the gallery, waiting to be heard. And I watched in admiration as you lined up outside the house and greeted the legislators as you left. I want you to know that there are parents on your team, and we have no intention of making you play this one alone. Because Kansas teachers show up! Because every child in Kansas deserves equal access to an excellent education. We will protect public education in the state of Kansas. And with that, all I can say is game on for Kansas schools.